Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, you can head over to officehours.global where we answer your questions 7 days a week. And how do you ask your questions? Well, if you're a producer, you can head over to Mukana and submit one question at a time and vote them up or down. Or if you are watching this as a replay and you've got a question, head over to askofficehours.global where we'll get your question and add it to the show in the next day or so. So again, head over to askofficehours.global and you know what? Let's get into the questions.
First question this morning is from Harold Williams in Portsmouth, Virginia. The Miniforums MS01 has 2 Ethernet ports. Can these 2 ports have different IP ranges? For example, 10.00x and 192.168xx. How does software like ATEM or vMix determine which one to use?
Alexander?
Yeah, so 2 network ports means 2 network interfaces. So yes, absolutely, those can be connected to 2 totally different networks. They can have different configuration profiles. As far as the ATEM, can't speak to the vMix, but ATEM by default, when you install it, it is set up to use DHCP, which is a way of automatically configuring your network interface. So it'll just automatically be assigned an IP address and all the other relevant information like gateway, DNS server, where to resolve that and all that sort of stuff. So that's how it's set up by default. You can, on the ATEM, set it up to static IP. If you prefer that IP address to never change for whatever reason, you can do that.
Next question.
Next question's from me. How do private licensed wireless frequencies work? How do you prevent someone from using one of these frequencies when they're not authorized?
Go ahead, Alex.
Usually, the frequencies that are being licensed are not in most of the equipment that you're going to see out there used. So someone's not going to open up their Sennheiser, 100, ENG 100 and use a license because all of those are frequencies that are open for anyone to use. So typically, when someone's using a licensed frequency, it's outside of that. It's not always, but a lot of times it's outside of that range. It has to be outside that range, and so that. When you license those, typically there's a process, and I have to admit we probably need to bring somebody in to talk about license frequencies to get more detailed than that. But you do license the frequencies for a given region. Sometimes you have that region can be as big as the United States and as small as a certain area, but you have those license frequencies that only you can use. And what that allows for, of course, is people who are doing very high-end transmission. When they have those frequencies that are licensed, it means that they're not going to be encumbered by somebody else using them. Usually those are pretty difficult to have. And so what happens is you're not going to have like some random person using your frequencies for the most part. You might have something encroach on it by accident, but it's not usually it would be another company like yours who knows what they're doing that is stepping on your frequencies. And I'm sure that it happens. I've never seen that happen. In that process. But that's what, like, we work with a company called 3G. I think they moved from 3G wireless to 3G media, and they used all licensed frequencies. But they're doing things like NASCAR and so on and so forth, and they need to make sure that nothing's encumbered because they're doing really complicated processes. And we're trying to bring them on, and they'll be a perfect person for you to ask that question again.
Next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona asks, Fly Kids, what is your minimalist kit when flying to do interviews? No checked bags.
Jesse.
We take 2 cameras, and each camera should have at least 1 XLR in. We use the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras. I like the classic 6K. I take 1 6K and 1 4K. And we always bring 2 microphones, double the audio, double the cameras, and 2 lens sets. Something like a 24 to 70 will get you across the finish line on the 6K, and a 12 to 24 on the 4K will usually get us there. We were actually shooting with this. It all fits in a backpack, and we were using that exact kit all weekend long.
Jason?
I've used Jesse's almost exact kit for interviews in the past, but I'll give you a little bit of a different take. I would say in an absolute minimalist setup, it would be a Mix Pre 6 and a couple of iPhones. And you really can get the job done as long as you're careful with lighting.
And how are you wiring? Like when you say that, I'm very interested in you responding with the iPhones and into the Mix Pre 6 microphones. What are you using for that?
Well, there are a couple ways to do it. The easy way would just be to let the iPhones record their own sound and record the sound separately. And then just, if you're going to be using more than one camera or more than one iPhone, just sync it up in post. The other way to do it is, because modern iPhones have a USB-C port, they're class compliant, and you can actually, kid you not, plug a Mix-3 directly into an iPhone and get audio input. Wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's necessary, but it does work.
Awesome. Alex?
Yeah, and the cameras have changed over time, but typically 2 cameras is a pretty common thing. You want one obviously on axis. We like to use we like people to look as close to the center of the screen as possible. We've actually built teleprompters for the Interatron process that will fold up into a pack that's about a couple inches thick and about 7 by 7. And so we print those, and that just lets us slide the glass in over top of a 7-inch monitor, so people are still looking straight into the screen, because a lot of times our interviewers are not there. Mics are typically 416s. The lower end kits that we've had are NT2s, and the higher end kits are 416s. Typically, we're recording on some version of a sound devices. It could be a Mix-Pre 3 or 6, or because I have a Scorpio, oftentimes the Scorpio comes in. It's a little heavy to take for just a small interview, so typically a 3 would be what we would use there. But I tend to use shotguns because I tend not to like the sound of lavs. So I just don't like I just don't like anything about them. And I work with a lot of high profile. I got into the habit of it. I used to use lavs a lot. And I got into the habit of doing a lot of high-profile people that don't like to be touched. And so we got into this habit of using shotguns, because the people we were working with we weren't allowed to touch them. They had to be able to sit down and be able to do the interview. And so we got used to that sound and then couldn't go back, to the sound of the laughs. So that was kind of that's what kind of broke us of the habit. As far as lights go, in a small kit. Now, for me, the kit is typically a 1510 and a Rush 24 backpack. Everything will fit into that. If it can't fit into that, I don't go with it. Now, I will admit that most of the time when I'm doing interviews, I'm typically renting my lighting. So I typically rent lighting on site. So I don't bring the lights. It's very, very hard to have a single, no checked bags and something that's going to actually look okay for an interview. I know people like these little square lights and everything else, but they're very sourcey. And if I have to use those, I'm going to try to go to a local store and buy some foam core, and I'm going to bounce lights up to it. So I am known to get 4 of those little Pavo Tube 6Cs, and then what I'll do is I'll put them on either side I'll put 2 of them on either side of a big piece of foam core, sometimes 4 of them, and we attach the foam core to those, but we bounce them into the foam core, so we end up creating a much larger source. So that's a compact way to do that, and then you throw the foam core away. It's a loss. It's not very expensive, and so you just, or give it to somebody or whatever you want to do. But that's how we kind of get away with it if we're going to actually show up with that. But almost always there's somewhere. Lights are not very expensive to rent. Neither are C-stands and everything else. And so, I've gone to the Seychelles and just rented the light kit. So I bring a bunch of cameras and lenses and everything else. But even somewhere as remote as that, we'll have all the things. The only thing I'll say is that the sandbags don't smell good in the Seychelles. I don't know why. I think they just filled them with local sand or something. But that was the only problem that we had. But outside of that, that's usually what we do. We try to rent as much of the hard stuff, the tripods, the C-stands, that type of thing, where we go, and it really makes everything else much more affordable. The core electronics is what's really important.
I'm so glad you said that, because to this point, up until no one had said anything really about lights. And earlier this month when I was in Jamaica, that was, Jack, I wish you asked this question earlier, but I did go with the iPhones. I had a handheld microphone that I had a Zoom. So that was what I used to record in. But I do like your idea, Alex, of being able to rent on site. But then that's just yeah, go ahead.
And you'll find Jamaica is definitely a large enough city that if you're in Kingston, you would definitely be able to find a couple places that rented lights and everything else. And that's less mission critical for you if it doesn't, right. It's not like you want to use your cameras and your own recorder, but having the lights typically you can get from somebody that's almost anywhere in the world that you can rent
on site. I was like, well, push come to shove, I'll call my cousin and grab something. But right. I was able to just use daylight, and that was sufficient for what we needed to do. So great question there, Jack. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, describe what goes on behind the scenes with video and audio switching at the Olympics.
Alex?
I really think we should probably bring someone in to talk about it. I can say that it's much like many of the other sporting events that we see with trucks and so on and so forth, but at a much, much larger scale. So being able to route and manage all the audio and video for it is just an incredible undertaking. And I think that what we'll do is we'll try to bring somebody on that has worked on it. We've got a couple of people in our community that are there right now. But we'll see who we can find to talk a little bit about what it takes to actually to do the Olympics, because it's an entirely different beast from pretty much anything else I've ever seen.
How long do you think that ahead of time, just looking at this question, that they're mapping that out production wise?
Years.
So
it's well, you have to remember that a lot of the crews are the same from show to show. Right. I have Nate, who's been on our show a couple times. He cuts, he's a TD for something. He's always there somewhere. So usually I know that I can't call Nate during the Olympics because he'll be there, and we've got a bunch of he's been doing that for years. So you try to, you have definitely some local crew, but you also, and this is the same with FIFA, you'll have core crew that are local, but then you'll try to, and like with some of these I don't know what the Olympics does. I know with FIFA, they actually go in and they have a training program that starts months and months in advance to prep the people who are doing some of the stuff that they need that they're not going to bring crew in for. So it's an enormous lift to get some local stuff, but they're shipping in lots of things. But they're talking about it for years. They're planning it for at least a year, if not more. And it's a really heavy landing, for these things. And even then, it's still hard to get it all to work right. It's never perfect, even inside of all of those things, but it's very close to it. And it's probably one of the hardest sporting events to shoot in the world.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is asking, I've been watching the Paris 2024 opening ceremonies and am impressed by the performance segments with LED video floors on a barge. How would they fit the power content server infrastructure on a floating platform, probably without a tech on board?
Alex?
Well, if you look at some of the behind the scenes, they probably had a tech on board. So for anything that they were doing, these boats had a pretty large crew that was managing transmission, audio, video, all those bits and pieces. And so it's not that it may have looked like there weren't a lot of people on board, but there was definitely a few, and you could see in some cases the athletes and others looking off camera, being directed to do something. So they weren't there by themselves. But I would say that I have no idea how they powered the LED floors, although they're big, but they're not massive so I think that a large and they're only using them for a relatively short amount of time. So battery systems would probably be how they would approach that. Rion Smith said every boat had at least one photographer on board, so the crew is definitely there. But there's definitely more people there that were managing that. You can't really pull that off expecting the talent to be able to do anything. So,
next question.
This one's for me. What do you think of pro audio mixer company Mackie introducing NDI audio support on the DLZ Creator mixer to the average content creator? Are they utilizing NDI?
Alex?
Well, it seems like they're utilizing NDI if they're putting NDI audio in. I'm not sure what you meant by that question, Alex.
What I mean is the average person. I don't think, this is just my suspicion, but I don't think a lot of content creators really know what NDI is. It just seems like it's more entrenched in the broadcast world. At least that's my experience. So on a sub $1,000 audio product, the average customer that is buying that type of product, do they know what NDI is? And it kind of surprised me that they put it such a high-end feature in a type of sort of prosumer product like that.
Well, I think that one of the things that Mackie needs to get over is that in our world they're not used as much anymore, and so I think that Mackie kind of going after that market by saying, "Hey, we're one of the only people that you can do NDI audio with." So for everyone to the other side of that coin is that for everyone who doesn't use or is using heavy NDI and needs a mixer and is looking for some kind of NDI audio solution, this is now one of the only mixers that's out there that does that. So I think that there's an advantage if you're already if people who are already doing that need to do something there's not that many options at the moment. So that could be their kind of their angle. And it's not like they had to rebuild redesign the entire mixer to do this. It's just, I believe it's adding a feature to it, right?
Yeah, it was a firmware update, actually.
Yeah. So that's a really inexpensive way for them to nudge into a market that they don't have right now.
Now, I was trying to find the price point for it. I didn't immediately see which device-wise, but
I don't think they're that expensive. I mean, these are pretty.
That's my point, though, that is it possible that someone who would be using ND, and this is all speculation just based off of this, when people add those kind of features to a product, to Alexander's point, sub 1,000, potentially, is it just getting some more market share, not necessarily from your average creator, but that person that toes the line, like in between. Just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that it's it definitely puts them in a different position, and they didn't have to change the mixer. And there's many people who are doing smaller NDI projects that this would potentially work very well for. So,
next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, according to Bloomberg, Apple's highly anticipated AI features, collectively known as Apple Intelligence, will not be included in the initial release of iOS 18 and iPadOS 18 this September, instead rolling out in later updates. What happened?
Ryan?
I think this is something that they had spoken to all the way back at WWDC, saying that initially some of these items were going to be in preview and that this was going to roll out over a broader period of time. I mean, folks are there already in terms of competing platforms having a lot of what it is that Apple rolled out, but we're of course happy to see them be more careful with local small language models that they're deploying on the device and not sending everything up to the cloud the way that a lot of these are being architected today.
Bill?
Yeah, what Ryan said. Apple isn't known necessarily for wanting to be the first out of the gate with anything like this. What they want to do is find a way to distinguish themselves as being better. And I think what he mentioned about the on-device processing of AI kinds of things, doing some work that's private to you on your device rather than relying entirely on in-the-cloud models, is kind of their thought. And they've also run a lot of AI stuff inside their software and everything else, but it's kind of hidden. They don't flash it up front and say, now with AI, they just build in something that you kind of discover like, oh, it's completing this for me. Or in the case of a picture, I touched on this and suddenly I had an outline. What does that mean? Oh, it's cut it out intelligently for me. It's really rolled into the DNA of the products rather than a big announcement type thing. So that's why I think they're holding off.
Jesse?
I think the last time Apple launched a piece of software or product that absolutely wasn't ready was Maps, and they've been very, very conservative about holding off until the thing is absolutely ready for the audience.
Jason?
Oh, yeah. Maps was no good. I think Apple is making continued use of this thing that they've said for the last several years, which is that not all features are available right at the time of launch, and they're stretching them out more and more and more over time, over the years. But I think it's because they are being more and more ambitious with their offering, and trying to not get a black eye, and that just makes sense.
And Alex.
Yeah, I think to Bill's point, Apple and Google and many others have been adding AI features or what they call machine learning features for a decade. They've been slowly adding these in. They do a lot of the work for you. They're constantly building those in. They just had to bring them to the surface quickly so people would stop talking about it. So they were like, so they're like, okay, so I mean, because they're all this stuff. It's not like they just suddenly hired a bunch of people a year ago and started writing some of these features. But what they did do is they spitballed an idea of like, well, how would we use AI in an Apple-y way? And so I think that one of the big advantages that you have for Apple is because they own that platform and because they're willing to spend money into some of these things, and because they're not dealing with there's a huge advantage to Apple not dealing with a heterogeneous platform. So Android is very fragmented, and most of these solutions want to work on iPhones and on Android and on computers and everything else. Apple has its own ecosystem, and so it's able to do things that no one else is going to do. And as a result, it also has an incredible lock-in with its users. so as a result, the chances of them, they don't have to rush towards any of these things. They can simply just kind of cruise along and go. And so they tell us, hey, don't worry, we're doing something, we're bringing it along. And then they're just going to slowly just roll this stuff out over the next year. I would be surprised if we saw everything that they announced in this last WWDC before. All of it will probably finish rolling out sometime between February and April of next year. So that's probably, and what is safely before the next WWDC. so what they don't want to do is go into the next WWDC without something that they announced coming out. But I would say the drop dead is June 1st of next year for all of the stuff to come out to make sure that it's done. We're finished with that. We can talk about whatever's new. But it's I think that if other people in the industry aren't concerned about what Apple's doing, they should be, because they have the ability. What they're setting up is 3 layers of AI, which is one that's on your device, one that's in their cloud, and then kind of a release valve to everything else. And that release valve they can just keep pushing the borders of what's on your phone and what's in the Apple cloud. They can just keep pushing that border out until it hits about 90 to 95% of what 90 to 95% of the world wants. And that they don't need to go any further than that, because they gave you a release valve to get to all the other things. And then they're going to hand those back to developers without the developers having to figure out how to use them. So by handing it back through the APIs and the SDKs, it means the developers don't need to know anything about AI to add AI. So what you end up with is an enormous amount of AI that's being used for basically free by the developers to build all kinds of solutions into the cloud for users. And that is a really complicated thing to compete with. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes.
1,000% agree with you, Alex, is that they needed to throw the gauntlet down and say, listen, we're working on it. So we're here. And pulling in some comments from our community, John says, Apple never said that they are day one features. For the evidence, they didn't start on them until late. John says that Apple said at WDC that the Apple Intel features would be rolled out slowly over the next years. So no surprises there. And just even with going back to the idea of just them needing to say that we're here, but they did much more than that as well. They also showed us that what's the slogan they rolled out? It was like Apple for everyone, or for like the average person. Like, so them going back to like the personal PC, they're saying that from the AI perspective as well, that anyone can touch it. And when you look at folks who are some of the big companies that are rolling out, not everyone really does have those day one features. Recently, Google they've had some of their features, not all of them, but Claude really in the latest update is the only one that has, when they've made their announcements, that they were ready same day. So this is not necessarily new in that regard. Alex?
And the standard way that Apple works is to draft behind everyone just a little bit and then just simply out implement them. So that they're not trying to generally be the front runner. What they do is they look at what's going on, they make a decision about it, and then they grind a solution that is better that's easier to use. And they work on that interface, they work on that back and forth. And so they're not usually ahead of anybody. They just simply out implement them, and so there's never any rush usually for Apple. They can be behind because they're just watching everybody else do crazy things, and which is really exciting and keeps the industry moving forward. But what Apple does, the problem is they just generally eat everybody's lunch. After they've already made it, they've prepared it, they're like, okay, well, how about we do it this way? And so that's the challenge that everybody has.
Next question.
Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri asks, is anyone using either the public or developers beta of iOS 18? And if so, any comments? Jason?
I've been using iPadOS 18 since the new iPad Pros came out. And, it's right along the lines of your standard beta as a rule. I don't ever install it on production machines. I've got to say that using the pencil for math, up to and including physics, really like multivariate calc is surprisingly good. My handwriting is so bad though that I end up messing up the demos because it's just, I feel like I'm writing on glass and my handwriting isn't great to begin with. But yeah, I'm pretty impressed so far.
Alex?
The calculator with the handwriting is mind blowing. Like it's just it just makes my brain kind of turn inside out, because you'll sit there and you'll do something, you keep on adding, you could progressively add to the equation, and it just keeps on changing, updating the calculation, and it's just it's crazy. So I mean, I'm old enough to remember TI, Texas Instruments, the big calculators that were really expensive, and so I'm just old enough to go, we've gone from that to just handwriting an equation out, and it just does it, and you're just like, it's really amazing. I'm using the iOS on my phone. I'm very aggressive about the iOS. I'm not very, obviously I've talked about in the past, I do most of my production work on machines, and I tend to fall way behind on updating my machines. I just let them figure it out. But on my phone and so I will admit that there's little glitchy things here and there, but overall it's been great. It feels like it wants to dial very quickly, so you have to be kind of careful. Like, it just suddenly I'm realizing I'm dialing someone. I don't remember exactly why. So that's a little bit of a thing that makes me a little nervous. The thing that I've really gotten kind of, and I can't remember whether this is in 17 or 18, but if number one is if you just hold not on an icon, but just on the background, you get an edit, and you can start adding widgets and customizing. And this is where you can do the dark mode, the light mode. You can't do that in 17. So this dark mode, I found that I didn't like it. So I went to the dark mode and that colored mode and everything else. And I've already gotten rid of all of it and just went back to the regular icons. So that was I kind of pushed back on that. But one of the things, and I don't know whether this is in 17 or 18, because I don't have a phone that isn't on 18, is you can take a folder. I don't know why you can't take a note, but you can take a folder in Notes and put it as a widget on your in your phone, right? So my front page now has this collection of notes, and what I do is, because you can't do a note, and again, I don't know why, I just have a folder for each note that I want, and now it's taking up kind of my front, and that's like my to-do lists, my ideas that pop into my head, things I don't know how to, things I want to do more research on. They're now on the front page of my phone, and I just tap on them and I can immediately type something in and then let them go. So I don't even have to go through the process of finding notes. Like, this is the note that I'm looking for, and I can very quickly, and that reducing that friction makes it much more likely for me to fill it out.
Jason?
Well, yeah, and to add on to that, Notes has this incredible hidden feature that is available right now, that allows you, if you go in, let me go to 2 there. If you're editing a note and then you just hit two forward brackets, you can actually search any other note and add that just as a quick shortcut. So a single note can very quickly become a whole lot of notes, or an index of notes. And that is just one of these really little things that I continue to just be amazed by.
Jason, now you make me want to go on YouTube and just look for all the notes hacks, all of them. Next question.
Next one's from me. Can the Sony FX30 be powered from a USB-C charger and stay on without issue, or do you need a dummy battery connected to power supply?
Jason?
It can. A lot of the time you're using USB-C for something else, capturing, or I'm not sure if it does direct to webcam, but it's really more about stability. If you lose that power connection even a little bit, you can have issues if you don't at least have a backup battery. But yes, it is stable.
Ryan?
I am running an FX30 and have been using the USB-C the entire time. Credit to John Wallace for kind of getting me comfortable with doing it that way. The key is you want power delivery kind of grade throughput there from the power source, and then you should have no problem whatsoever with USB-C.
Alex?
I definitely, it depends on the heat of your room or where it's at, or other things like that, but I definitely have had issues with the USB-C. So I use a dummy battery, and I didn't have it 100% work all the time until I had a dummy battery. So maybe I am doing something wrong, but it hasn't been perfectly stable without the dummy battery. And that's been both for the E1 or E10, the ZV-E10, as well as the FX30. I just felt like, and even with the ZV-E10, at the right temperature, it will still turn off. And so mine is, to make sure that it doesn't do that, mine is on a dummy battery, and my monitor is open. to make sure that it's got as much through ventilation as possible.
Coming in from the comments, Mickey says that I would not trust powering production tools by USB-C for anything that matters. USB-C has an inherent issue of being a non-locking connector. Alexander?
Yeah, so one thing I'm curious about, and I don't know if this is what you were using, Alex, but I've heard of reports of some problems with third-party batteries or power supplies. I know there was a new firmware update recently for the FX3. I don't know if it's the same firmware for the 30, but now it warns you and complains if you're putting in non-OEM batteries. So are you using the Sony dummy battery power supply? Yeah.
Yeah. The dummy batteries, I'm not. I'm using I don't know what dummy battery I bought. It's not a Sony dummy battery. I'm buying, it's been the one that I got a long time ago. It's definitely not a Sony. The batteries are Sony's when I use them. But I haven't had any trouble with this one. But I haven't updated the firmware for quite some time. So if it's a new one, then maybe that would be different.
Next question.
Jesse Kester and Glendale here on the panel. We've always had trouble with sync slip on iPhones over long interviews. Are the newer models more stable?
Alex?
What model are you using when you're asking about newer models?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Thank you. Anything like 14? I'm just wondering, I haven't used one that can record for an hour and hold the audio slip. And this was in response to Jason's mentioning of using iPhones in an interview kit. I'm just wondering if anybody has had success with an hour-long interview without the end of that hour being, like 30 seconds off from the beginning of the hour.
It's not the way I use the phone, so I don't know. I don't have the answer. I was just wondering what version you were talking about. I think that I will say that I haven't tested it. The 15 is probably the biggest jump. I don't know if I would have considered the iPhone a production tool until the 15 came out. I think that's when my vision of what it could do changed. But generally, what I use the iPhones for are pickup shots. Things I'm going to cut in. And I've been using that since version 10 or earlier. So a lot of times little parts for the open. A lot of times we want responsive parts that are showing the crowd, showing where we went, showing a bunch of other things, and we'll go out and shoot a bunch of that stuff the day of the event. And the easiest way for us to do that without getting a lot of attention is to just go out with an iPhone and shoot all of that on some kind of stabilizer, typically a DJI. Or something like that, and just stabilize a bunch of stuff and cut that together, and that becomes part of we insert it into the places that we know. But that's my most common use case for an iPhone in production, that and time lapse.
Jesse?
And also, I could be remembering this wrong, but I believe we've had success of piping the camera feed out to like an ATEM or a ATEMOS and recording there, and being able to do a long take without slip. Let me pass to the next Bill.
Yeah.
Bill?
The only time I've ever had slippage problems with my iPhone footage is when somehow I managed to get the menus wrong and was recording at 44.1 instead of 48 if I was going into a 48 world. Almost always, even with the smart 3.2 pull up and pull down that you normally get, that's caused me drift over the course of time. So I make sure I lock that. And then after that, I can't remember the last time I shot something that was an hour long, but it seems to me that it's not in top of mind. So maybe that go down that path.
And Jason?
I'll tell you when, Bill. It was when we shot 48 minutes of ProRes at NAB.
Oh, that's right.
With the walk around.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, there was no slip on that whatsoever.
Yeah, you're right. We never had a problem with any of the posts.
I can't speak for older iPhones, but this one is the 15 Pro is pretty solid.
Next question.
Ian Alford in London is asking, where are people going to watch behind the scenes for the Olympics?
Alex?
Let us know. So we haven't seen a lot of. There's a little bit of behind the scenes related to certain vendors, but usually a lot of those behind the scenes tend to happen after the event. So I would keep your eyes open for it, but you'll probably see a bunch of breakdowns after the event. A lot of times, folks don't want to show it ahead of time, so we'll see how much they how much they actually show. Usually you'll see like little highly produced segments that NBC might do, but you don't see real behind the scenes until they do breakdowns of them or some kind of case studies that usually happen a month or two afterwards in a lot of the, what we would call the industry rags.
Apologies, yeah, and I think that, as you said, Alex, NBC Peacock actually has a dedicated station or dedicated programming to showing us what's happening behind the scenes with the production-wise, but then also the team. So both of those, we'll look forward to the breakdown and what's happening in real time. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, it's impressive how Peacock's daily Olympic recap reproduces Al Michaels' voice so realistically without a hint of artifacting. Could NBC have licensed the technology from an existing AI company or developed it themselves?
Alex?
I'm surprised that they haven't said it, whether they're working with 11 Labs. It seems like everyone's working with 11 Labs right now to do these. If they didn't, then there's probably some kind of marketing thing that didn't get sewn up. But I'd be very surprised if they were using anything other than 11 Labs at the moment. They've kind of, every R&D thing related to this that I've seen in the recent, the last couple months or last 3 to 6 months, which is like an eternity in AI, have all been 11 Labs doing the voices.
Next question.
Next question is from... frozen here for me. Mike Beardmore in Bedford, UK. What would you use a dummy HDMI plug for?
Jason?
If it's the one I'm thinking of, I've used them in the past for Mac Minis that are in a server rack to basically not let it power down the graphics capabilities. If I'm remoting into it, I need it to be able to create graphics and not just kind of be a server racked, displayless, headless unit. And it works pretty well for that.
Next question.
Next one's for me. This one is, what is a debayer filter as it pertains to camera sensors?
Jesse?
So your camera sensor is naturally monochrome, and what I mean by that is that the pixels on your sensor only are sensitive to luminance. Now, to get a color image, that pixel is broken down into a matrix of 4 pixels. 1 is red, 1 is blue, and 2 are green. And when you record a raw image, it saves each of that color data to what we can think of as a separate layer inside the raw image. So there's a red image, a blue image, and a green image. When you're sending out something like a JPEG, you need to flatten this or debayer it, get all that pixel data from 3 images into 1 numeric value per pixel. So that's what debayering is.
The
Alex?
thing that's important to realize is that's why sharpening is used in your images, because it's actually a blurry image because all the pixels aren't sitting on top of each other. The only chip that I know of that captures it differently is the Foveon, which never really took on. I think Fuji uses it, and it stacks the pixels on top of each other so that they're truly on top of them. And then they say it's the equivalent of something much larger than what it actually is. And that kind of them using kind of weird math to try to make it work has made it very confusing for a lot of people. And or maybe it was Sigma, I think, that took on the Foveon sensor. But either way, it's been one of those things that they had kind of a confusing way of talking about the sensor resolution, and because of that, I think a lot of people just kind of wrote it off. Although it was a really interesting technology, but you do have to a lot of times have to add some sharpening to it, otherwise it's going to. And cameras will do this automatically for you, just to make sure that you feel like you're looking at a sharp image.
Next question.
Jesse Kester in Glendale asks, what AI features have you noticed on Apple platforms that rolled out silently and prior to their Apple Intelligence announcement?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Bill, you mentioned autocomplete, but one that I stumbled on maybe 6-8 months ago was I was in the search bar looking for an email that contained the word moon, and it started feeding back to me ProRes files that had shots of the moon in the background. So I was wondering if anyone else caught Apple implementing a very, very useful feature silently and secretly that had AI integration in.
Bill?
For me, it was about a year ago. I was at ComiCon, and some of you who watched last year remember I had a really nice shot of Queen Amidala. It was the young lady from Iowa who had just built this beautiful costume. And I was in post afterwards, and I realized that I had a really nice shot of her, but I hated the background. I had too many people in the background, and it was really ugly. So I thought, well, I'm just going to move this somewhere. And on my phone, I touched it, and suddenly this weird little halo arrived around the photo, and I had no idea what it was. It was the first time no one had told me about it. I wasn't expecting it. I went, whoa, what did I do? What was that? And then I went back, and I said, well, I'll move it again, and that halo came up, and when I moved my finger, the image had been keyed out of the background, a complex background. It had traced the edges, and I was able to move her separately from the background, and it totally freaked me out. And I immediately realized, oh, let me see if I can copy that. And sure enough, I could. And then I was able to paste that over a better background shot that I'd gotten and create a composite on my phone instantly. That was just saturated with intelligent AI, and no one had even told me they had rolled it out. It was just there in the phone, and it blew my mind. And since then, I've used it a good little bit.
I was just about to ask you if is that part of your workflow that you've been
just yesterday while I was sitting at lunch, I was pulling characters out of the shots I was taking at Comic-Con and isolating, this guy, I want him, and I'm going to put him, and it just keyed them out. You know, it was probably 85% accurate and really good. Some of them did not work. There wasn't a clean thing for the AI to grab onto, but some of them worked beautifully, like that Amidala photo. And it was like, but I can just cut things out that easy. It's amazing.
Yeah, that was kind of a trend around that time of just on social of people doing that. And there was a certain, can't remember the beat that it was. So yes, them slipping it in there and coming in from the comments. John says, Apple Messages started creating audio descriptions of photos I received in text a few months ago. That's actually right. And also voice messages. Your voicemails start popping up with some kind of light transcription of whatever the voice message is. So they're there making sure that they're showing us that they are working behind the scenes. Alex?
I mean, one of the ones that's kind of invisible is I get new photos every day that pop up in these like highlighted photos on my phone that are of my kids or places I've been or other things like that. And it's going through and finding not only the people that you had, and they've been working on this for like well over a decade, but not only the people that you know and the places that you've been, but the best photos of them. It's grabbing those and posting those, and there's some. I sent one to my wife the other day of her with my son, and she's like, "Where was this?" And I had to go back and look at the GPS. I was like, "I don't remember taking it. Like, I don't remember taking that photo. I don't remember where that photo lived, but it found it and it brought it to the surface. It's a really nice feature. And again, an AI, quote unquote AI feature, which is the new word for algorithm. Sometimes, not always. That's not, but so. And then my daughter gave me a new term this over the weekend. She said, I was asking her how she finds music, and she says, well, sometimes I use the recommendation features, and sometimes I use YouTube, sometimes I use Pinterest, and she goes, and then sometimes I use people, the OG of algorithms.
Wow.
She actually asks her friends, and she goes, well, that's the OG of recommendation engines.
Because people still work.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Exactly.
Ryan?
Another one that I like a lot is that widget that is kind of like a half a home screen that's got two rows of 4 apps. And so it basically just kind of intelligently surfaces the right app. And it's amazing, if not a little bit concerning, that you never have to swipe past that little bar to open the app. I mean, I get to the office and the first thing I need to do is get my key light adjusted to, the right brightness. And I open my phone, and whether it's in the swipe down search or right there in the home screen is, those apps that I use at like exactly 7:45 every single day.
Next question.
From Jack Gannon, Phoenix, Arizona. Alex, when you're using a shotgun mic as a primary audio in an interview, what do you use as a backup when you don't have lavs? Just multiple shotgun mics?
Jesse?
So there are 2 main points of redundancy that I think will address this question. The first is when you're micing the people and it's mission critical, you want to be using 2 2 shotguns on each person if it's a 2-person interview. Well, however many people there are. And the other point of redundancy is the record point. So you want to have those mics feeding into a unit that records, and then we break out from that unit and feed into each camera as clean as we can get it. If we can do a balanced signal from the record unit to cameras, we will. And if we can't, we will do it via, the 3.5 millimeter jack, which will give you some audio degradation, but it's better to have that same clean audio on all cameras and your recording device, and usually we have another backup recording device next to the main one that's getting that same signal as well. Alex, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so
Alex,
So I here's an example of one that we had here. So here's a like a pretty typical setup for us for an interview. Some large sources, some bounces, and so on and so forth. But you can see the 2 mics that are up here. Those are primary and backup mics there. And then there's another one that's kind of hard to see that's down here. So if they look down, I want to be able to have something. If they lean forward or look down, I want to have something there. So that's I think these are Sheps in this case, but I think these are Sheps and this might be a 416. Anyway, so but those are the. But that's kind of a typical setup for us to make that happen. Is you're right, primary and backup, and then an alternative low shotgun to grab onto something if they do something that we don't expect them to.
Next question.
Robert Green in Los Angeles asks, how was ComiCon this year? Did a theme emerge?
Go ahead, Bill.
Yes. Well, I don't know about theme. Theme is that the money is back and Comic-Con is roaring. It was an amazing year. The place was just wall-to-wall craziness. If you want to take a minute here, I can show you a couple of little things. I didn't do a lot, and I was just really quick in getting this going. That's the convention center. So you can see it's a pretty big place. You can see that the building wraps were all over the place. People spent huge amounts of money. The whole property, not just inside the convention center, but this is one of the pop-ups from FX over by the Marriott. You can see all the installations and the craziness they do. One of the first things I ran into that I hadn't done last year was the Star Wars family photo. So they get all the cosplayers who are doing any kind of Star Wars thing. They bring them together in the back and they do a formal portrait of that. We're going to go inside the convention center, wall-to-wall humanity. The big players are all back, spending massive amounts of money. There's a lot of things for the kids. There's just tons of merch stuff that you can buy. Artist Alley is still there, where the actual artists who draw the comics come and set up a table. And if you have a favorite artist, you can go interact with them a little bit and talk. One of my favorite things this year, the costume repair company people. This is just a little booth they set up on one of the little corners of the room. And if your costume's falling apart, these people will fix it for you. I just thought that's such the spirit of Comic-Con. And so I just put 4 of my shots in from what I shot this year. It's just fun seeing the creativity that people put into their costumes. It is a beautiful facility, so you have some of these incredible frames for people to be able to shoot them against. And it was just a lovely time at Comic-Con for 2024. I'm always really jazzed when I get to go every year because it's so many people doing such good work creatively.
Those are some great shots. Thanks, Bill. Jesse?
Oh, Bill, thank you for being the optimist on this panel. The themes were $100 for a parking space for a day, which is something I never imagined I'd see in my lifetime.
You're right about that. It is expensive.
For everyone who's not a fan of using a lavalier for a 2-person interview, things get worse. For everyone who doesn't like lavaliers with giant company logos on a black box on the side of it, things get worse. I blacked out the people, so we're not blowing up anyone's spot. But here's somebody who has attached a lavalier that is wireless. It's very small, but they've got the DJI wireless. They put it on a stick, so they're using it as an actual handheld microphone and going back and forth like this, which that's the theme of Comic-Con.
At least they're not handing it back and forth. Lord.
Alex?
Yeah, incredible rollout for Marvel on their schedule for 2026. I'm very curious to see how this does. Like, it feels very dense. like it just feels like we are going to do this all at one time. And I'm very curious from a theatrical release perspective. It feels like in some ways what they were doing is taking a little bit of a break in 2025. Of course, they're resetting. But it felt like they were trying to make sure that everybody knew in advance when they're releasing, to try to push, obviously other things away from those dates. But and that's a very common thing to do, by the way. It's not something that they just created now. But I think that it just feels like a lot of Marvel, in 2026, which is good from a business perspective. I'm looking forward to it as someone who might do stuff related to that. But I'm very curious. I'm a little concerned that there's so much in one year, but we'll see.
And Bill.
Yeah, one more thing. Paramount Plus was wrapping all the buildings, so I don't know exactly what's happening with them, but they were a monstrous present at this year's ComiCon. Probably half the building wraps and into the gas lamp district, which is kind of adjacent to the convention center. And everybody who doesn't have tickets to ComiCon goes and hangs out because it is a moving cosplay craziness down there. But they had all sorts of what they're now calling activations, which is when a company comes in and takes over a property and promotes their wares. And, they had activations with Ferris wheels, some of the one that I showed you from FX. There's just a lot of money spent, and it felt like it was coming back a little bit, but boy, it's roared back this year, and it was full tilt ahead.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, X automatically enabled a setting allowing user data, including user interactions, posts, inputs, and results to be used for training and fine-tuning purposes for its Grok AI. Is this cool?
Jesse.
Is it cool? Like, is it legal? Yes. Is it cool? Like, is it cool? No.
Alexander.
I don't care. It's all public information. I really don't care if they take all of my posts. I mean, I don't understand why anybody would be worried about this.
And Alex.
I think the two Alexes are and when I put what I put on Twitter, I'm not really worried about someone scraping. Like, I just don't. Sure. I don't put. I guess I don't feel like I put anything of enough use to matter. But I think that I don't. And I'd be really interested to see if it really moves the needle for Grok anyway. Like, I just don't. I don't know if anyone's really paying attention to Grok. Maybe it'll be a dark horse that suddenly surprises us because it has all this Twitter information. But the real value is Reddit. Like, everyone talks about Reddit's value to AI and scraping, but I don't. I don't know if it. I guess I'm still in that zone of, hey, we all knew that we were pushing stuff publicly. I'm not sure if scraping it is necessarily even that big of an issue. So,
Ryan?
It's kind of this whole new concept of like things being out there for posterity, right? I mean, we all should have been operating that way anytime we were putting anything on Twitter or YouTube and the like. But now there's this interesting element, and that this always existed, that a thing could be kind of replicated, and that was kind of the problem, right? But to the extent that you get rid of it, certainly an AI is not going to unlearn what it previously learned. So, new meaning to posterity for me.
And Jesse.
And please remember, when a social media company says we would never do anything unethical with your data, once it's on their servers, it's their data.
Absolutely correct. Alex?
And I guess I would say the other thing is just be careful of what you're putting up online. I mean, I guess I'm pretty careful. And I think that I've almost always had at least a couple thousand followers on Twitter. I mean, since it began. So I think that as a result, you think about, oh, well, I'm sending this out. Like right now, I think I'm sending this out to 40,000 people. Like it doesn't actually, 40,000 people don't see it. But I think of like, there's 40,000 people that could see this when I send it out or more. So it goes through my head about what I'm putting out. I think a lot of people, when you see what they tweet, you're like, I'm not sure if they thought about that when they did it. So, but you should always be thinking about what you're putting up and assume that it's all permanent and assume that it all could be used against you.
Next question.
Russell K. in Brooklyn, Maine asks, Alex, I was intrigued with your mention of having a panel of chefs interact with farmers at a farm market. Is this a project that is now in the works, or was that just an example of a way to use cloud production?
Go ahead, Alex.
I was doing research on it on on yesterday. So it is in the works. How it gets done and what it looks like, I don't know yet. And when we started, I don't know yet. But we are looking at the potential of going. We're looking in general at cooking. Cooking is a really big. It's a fundamental thing. Most people need some cooking in their life, somebody doing it for them, or they don't last very long. So cooking is a really, unless you're into all raw, cooking is a pretty important piece of life. And there's a huge opportunity in cooking right now, and the reason for that is that the price of food has gotten so high. So the price of going out has gotten high, and that creates every pinch creates a disruption opportunity. And so what we're looking at is the potential of more people wanting to make their own food and more people wanting to buy their own food, because they're realizing that ultra-processed food is basically candy bars. Again, pretty much everything in a box is probably not good for you. And so people are starting to land on people. In addition to that, the cost of going out is gotten to the point where people are starting to wince a little bit. And we see that as a market opportunity. So so anything anything like that, your margin is our opportunity, and people cooking at home and buying things from a farmer's market. The other opportunity that's being created by Amazon is that Whole Foods is becoming Trader Joe's. And so and some of us who've been going to Whole Foods can complain about it, but what it does is it creates a market opportunity again. So you have people who are disgruntled by the fact that a lot of the great brands are being pulled out of Whole Foods and being replaced by 365 and other things like that. And again, I look at things generally as market opportunities. Like, what are the, what could you do with this problem? And so I think that there's a bunch of pinch points that we think are interesting. In addition to that, it's a great way to experiment with the idea of learning a skill, which we do a lot of. So we've done this. We've worked in and out of cooking for almost since the beginning of office hours. And so because it's a great training ground or a great experimentation in the idea of skills training in a market that's much larger than just AV. So definitely expect us to play more with that. I'm doing research on what would it take to do it. I did some bandwidth tests. I'm doing 3D tests. I'm doing a bunch of other things. So every week I'm now going to farmers markets and thinking about it, but it could still be a while before we try to do anything with it. Oh, can't hear you.
Next question.
James Haldane in Vancouver, Canada asks, how would you set up a Starlink Standard for temporary use at an event? Would it be better to use an Avenger Stand or mount it on a 2-ton truck? I want to ensure it remains secure and isn't tampered with outside the venue.
Jason?
Best way to make sure that it's not going to be tampered is to make sure that it can't be reached. All of the Starlink installations I've seen that are on a truck seem to be pretty solid. I would reach out to Chris Fenwick, whose mount looked pretty neat and relatively simple. It really comes down to how much flexibility and motion you need, but the sway that you'd get on a 2-ton truck is negligible. So I'd say you'd be fine there.
Next question.
Rian Smith in Trinidad, West Indies asks, Alex, what do you think about getting a Canon R7 with the new dual VR lens versus iPhone 15? Please include live streaming capabilities and recording capabilities.
Yeah. So the this is the R5. This is, I think, similar to what Rian was talking about there. So this is the R5 with the dual lens, and there's not really any true streaming capabilities here. So at 8K, 4K per eye, it's a great recording methodology. The streaming, and I'm not clear whether the R7 is able to do that yet. I'm less familiar with the R7 right now. So I think that's the challenge there. There are also two entirely different experiences. So when you're streaming from the phone, which I did a little bit of testing on Sunday, and I'll be doing a lot more testing on Twit. So we're going to stream all of Twit next Sunday to the Apple Vision Pro. So if you have an Apple Vision Pro, we're going to stream it all there as a test. This will be a spatial stream that we're streaming out. So doing it with the phone is going to have a different interaxial distance. It's also going to not be 180 degree spherical. So 180 degree it's going to be 16 by 9 in stereo. So it's a different structure there.
And Jesse?
Just a quick note, the R7 is an ASPC sensor and the R5 is full frame. So I don't even know if the
I don't even know if you can use
R7
it.
would work with the dual, but maybe it's referring to the R5 Mark II that's coming out soon.
Yeah.
We've got a great week lined up for you here on Office Hours. Tomorrow, we'll be speaking with Rick Markley as he demonstrates how we can use the latest AI to generate images. And then on Wednesday, we'll get into our guest, Mark Wright, as he'll be talking about his production setup for the Caribbean Carnival. And for the rest of the schedule for you, the week, you can head over to officehours.global.